We are at the beginning of the end of the Krakoan era of X-Men, and not shockingly, this does not start out with a bang. This is Gerry Duggan with Lucas Wernick on art for Fall of the House of X #1, and there are a lot of things going on here. Mostly it centers around a sham trial of Cyclops, the leader of the X-Men, who I guess was kidnapped after he was paralyzed after the last Hellfire Gala. His eyelids were sewn shut, and he's on a sham trial in Paris. So the Orcus people can finally, once and for all, turn public opinion on the X-Men because now they are invasive alien species. I think that's what's said multiple times throughout this comic book, which makes no sense within the Marvel Comics universe, the 616. It's certainly been established for a very, very long time that mutants, at least the X-Men mutants, are born of humans. They're certainly not an alien species. They're not really invasive. Are they dangerous? I would say after reading the Krakoan era, there would be a lot of reasons for the world to turn on the X-Men. They basically held the world hostage and said, you must acknowledge us regardless of preconditions, or we won't give you our cancer-curing drugs, our drugs that will prolong your lives and all this kind of stuff. Basically holding the world hostage with the cure for cancer. Didn't seem like a very heroic act to me. We also had one X-Men going on a worldwide murder spree over plastic bags and pollution. We also saw Professor X go to Reed Richards, who was trying to prevent his son from going to Krakoa and staying with his family. If he wanted him to stay with his parents, Reed Richards invented a way to prevent his son from going through the gate, and Charles basically went into his mind and removed it. Pretty invasive stuff, not very heroic in my opinion. The entire time they were on Krakoa, they basically learned how to clone themselves, so they had a never-ending army to send out there, but they hid it from the public's eye. I wonder why people don't want to trust the X-Men in the Krakoan era. Oh, and let's not forget the fact that basically Krakoa decided any crimes that Magneto or any of these other supervillains that happen to be mutants did outside of Krakoa, they are no longer liable for. They're no longer to be held responsible. You send them back to Krakoa, we forgive them for everything. All the crimes committed against citizens of different countries in the world, those no longer apply to them anymore. We're just going to forgive all those people, and we're going to live side by side with all these truly evil people and all their truly evil deeds, and we're just going to act like it never happened. So you could say, yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense why the world might want to back Orcus in this situation. The X-Men have certainly not been very heroic for a very long time, and I do believe that was initially by design by Jonathan Hickman, but I think he actually had a plan to get them out of this. Unfortunately, writers like Gerry Duggan, Kieran Gillen, Al Ewing, the best of the lot that they do have, just aren't really up to the task, and you have a story that just falls flat. And by the end, that alien invasive species thing actually makes sense because they actually do it. It's absolutely crazy. The good guys, once again, go out of their way to prove Orcus right in this comic book. I'm not going to cover the trial very much because there just isn't a whole lot to it, but I am going to cover just all the really terrible dialogue and writing and jokes from Gerry Duggan. Very auspicious start for Fall of the House of X, and it doesn't really portend good things for Rise of the House of X. Thankfully, there is another writer on that book. Perhaps Kieran Gillen can salvage some of this. Gerry Duggan, as the headline writer of anything, meant that this was probably never going to succeed because he's just never, ever been that guy. He's certainly never been funny without Brian Posehn co-writing Deadpool with him. And here's a great example of that. We start out, the sham trial of Cyclops is about to commence, and we have Colossus and Wolverine underneath this building because they're going to free him. I can kind of dig this. This feels like something a hero would do, and we just get these terrible, terrible jokes. We have Colossus and Wolverine, and they're talking about the old fastball special, but in this case, they're going to have to change a little bit because he's not throwing Wolverine. He's actually throwing one of the humans that's associated with Orcus, and he says, how about the pinata special? What a hilarious joke on the part of Gerry Duggan as they try to rename the fastball special while Colossus is throwing this human to his death. I believe they end up settling on the screwball special or something stupid like that. But every time Gerry Duggan tries to be funny in this comic book, it is absolutely not funny. Although the book is funny when Gerry Duggan is not trying to be funny. And I will give you examples of that. But this is just some of the really bad humor that you're going to find throughout this comic book. Then we see Rasputin IV, who is the chimera hybrid mutant from the future that has come back to the past, is actually levitating over where this trial is going to happen. In fact, you see those Stark Sentinels that are apparently Orcus's mutant killing machines sitting right there, standing guard. They obviously do not compute that Rasputin, who is levitating over the building at the time of the trial, is actually a mutant. And for reasons unknown, we have Professor X, who is basically corrupted right now by Sinister, like he's in his mind or whatever. He calls Rasputin back, even though she is the most powerful mutant in the history of mutants, and he tells her to abandon the task of saving Cyclops, and she leaves, basically effing over Wolverine and Colossus underneath the building, as well as Nightcrawler, who were all in place to do this big jailbreak of Cyclops and save him from the sham trial and all the embarrassment that would go along with it. We also get a lot of really bad dialogue. A lot of trendy buzzwords are put in the mouths of the X-Men. We hear resist a lot. We hear fascism a lot, bigots a lot, all that kind of stuff that might have been powerful and provocative 10 years ago, but in 2023, or I guess now 2024, just feels so cliche it's not even funny. Colossus, let these Orcus cowards run and tell all the murderers in red that anybody aligned with fascism will die squirming under my metal foot. Nightcrawler says, "Ein friend, I fear that you, no more fear from this moment on. They are the ones that will fear us." Not exactly in line with Charles Xavier's dream, but I will say this to Wolverine: don't worry, everyone already is scared of you because of all the things that you guys have done over the past 4 years during the Krakoan era, and rightfully so. They've done some pretty disgusting things, not exactly heroes these days. At the end of the sham trial, we do see the bad guys. We got Fei Long and Sinister and Dr. Greer and MODOK and Omega Sentinel, all very happy that now with the trial of Cyclops done, it's all over. The mutants are no longer a threat. People don't support them, as if that was ever going to be the end of it. And for some reason, Dr. Greer is like the focal point of all this. She's the one like leading Cyclops' torture and stuff, which to my knowledge has not been going on. I don't really remember seeing this character other than a panel here or there, but for some reason, like, she's the face of Orcus now, and it's no longer Fei Long and Sinister and Omega Sentinel and all that kind of stuff. I guess they needed a human face for it or whatever, but they didn't really build up to it. But obviously these guys wouldn't be celebrating. They would know that the fight was not over. But these are the bad guys, and they just think that they won everything because of a trial that really didn't mean anything. Nothing really happens. It was the most boring thing in the history of the world. And certainly one of the highlights since Jonathan Hickman has rebooted the X-Men line with House of X Powers of 10 was really Nimrod, like putting him into the focal point. It seemed like he was going to be the ultra big bad villain in all of this. And you wanted to see what Nimrod was capable of. I guess sort of maybe you saw it during the last Hellfire Gala. I guess he's the one that did lead the charge and start murdering everybody. But apparently Krakoa could have just stopped this the whole time, because Nimrod is actually sent to Krakoa to kill the island or whatever. He shows up and he talks some smack to Krakoa itself, and then Krakoa spits a loogie on him and encases him in amber. I crap you not. That's really the way that Nimrod is defeated in this comic book, and you're just going, Gerry Duggan, what is your problem? I think this is supposed to be a joke, but it just undersells the threat that Nimrod has been this entire time. And then even more embarrassing this, and it was kind of funny, even though I don't think this was part of the joke, like Krakoa just stands up, and apparently he's an Ent from like Lord of the Rings, and just like runs off of his own island, but I thought he was the island, and like jumps into the ocean and starts swimming for his life. Like, that's really what happens with Krakoa. I'm going, oh my goodness, oh, this is so bad. There's no way Jonathan Hickman ever intended for anything to go this poorly. But here we are, the end stretch where they basically take Jonathan Hickman's ideas and destroy them because they just don't have a good enough writer that understands what Hickman, I guess, was leading to. The only thing interesting, and I would use the word interesting in very loose terms, about the Cyclops trial is his manifesto that he puts out. And by the end of the trial, it's established that the mutants are an alien invasive species. Like I said, makes no sense within the history of the X-Men or the Marvel Universe or any of that kind of stuff. But that is the terminology that they use, and it's up to Cyclops and the X-Men to prove that they're the good guys, Orcus are the bad guys, and obviously they're not an invasive alien species. Remember that term. And this is what Cyclops says in his manifesto. Mutant lives do not beget human deaths. I was born right here in the United States of America. Does the Constitution not guarantee me the same rights as anyone else? First off, this is all being done in Paris. you're being tried in Paris. You're not actually being tried in the United States. In that case, because you're not a French citizen, you're likely not entitled to the same exact rights as French citizens are in France. And you're certainly not entitled to the protections of the Constitution of the United States of America while you're being tried in France. So that was a weird thing there. I will not be murdered by Orcus without a fight. And I ask everyone reading these words a simple question. Once fascism kills mutants, who will be next? Maybe you. Even now, I'm an optimist, and not because I've looked at the world through ruby quartz lenses my entire adult life. Real words from the mouth of Gerry Duggan. I reject Orcus's jurisdiction over me. I resist. Oh my goodness. Maybe it's time for Cyclops to dye his hair pink or wear one of those pink pussy hats or whatever things, because he's a resist. I wish you peace unless you're one of the people or artificial intelligences that wishes harm upon my family. If you are one of those souls, then I suggest you change your heart if you have one. Now there he says, I wish you peace unless you're one of the people prosecuting us. You got to see what happens in the end to see that that is a complete lie. It's never too late to turn away from hate. You might wonder why I participated in Orcus's sham trial at all. If I had no intention of defending myself, I was buying time for my teammates and my friends to gather their forces. That is the stupidest piece of rationale I've ever heard in the story. So Cyclops could have presented a defense. He could have called witnesses to the stand. He could have went to the stand himself and advocated on his own behalf. He could have filibustered the thing for 3 days, a week, or whatever. He could have added so much more time and kept Orcus busy with their PR stuff and kept their eyes off the mutants themselves, but he gave no defense whatsoever, and the trial was immediately over. You didn't buy anybody time, moron. You could have given them another week at least. And then he says, now I will defend myself, Cyclops of the X-Men. But then we see Kitty Pryde, and this is when the real hilarity begins. She starts checking in on all the other mutants and getting the forces together. She says, game on, Mr. and Mrs. X. And that's frickin' Iron Man, which I thought was really hilarious in a very stupid way, and I don't believe was intended. Then she says, it's time, Wolfer, be ready for Forge's fleet coming from deep space. So I guess that's Oraco on Mars or whatever. Nice gun, Juggernaut. This is real dialogue. I smashed into one of Cable's armories. Go be unstoppable, big guy. That's like her speech. And then finally, we get the speech to everybody that's siding with the X-Men from Emma Frost. And this is easily the most embarrassing part of the entire comic book. Hello, darlings. If you can hear my beautiful voice in your head, then welcome to the Resistance. This is Emma Frost, and I'm touching so many beautiful mutant and human minds. Keep resisting. We might be fighting earlier than we prefer, but I have the most confidence in your abilities. We will succeed. We must. The world is at stake, and we must be nothing less than fabulous. That's like, I don't know. That in my mind, that's what Leah Williams thinks is like a striking speech to get people motivated to fight, rather than, I don't know, just embarrassing. That's the best way to describe it. So that's how they get all the mutants together. It was unintentionally hilarious, way funnier than the Pinata special. And then remember, everyone's accusing them of being an invasive alien species, which they're not, which is easily provable. And also, Cyclops is in favor of the people that support them. And what do? They send Polaris out to recruit the Brood. Yes, they went out and recruited the Brood army. Is there a more invasive alien species in the entire Marvel universe than the Brood themselves? Are the Brood going to be like, you know what? This human that I want to kill right now is actually supporting the mutants? Absolutely not. And by the end, Orcus is proven right. They are inviting an invasive alien species to the planet to destroy it because they've had enough. They thought they were going to take over the world, and it didn't happen exactly the way they wanted to. So they're going to invite an alien species to come down and wipe everybody out. And that itself is the story of House of the Fall of X, or whatever this stupid book is, from Gerry Duggan. If you thought maybe Gerry Duggan's not up to the task, you were right. It's not a maybe. He's not up to the task. He should be writing event comic books. He shouldn't be headlining books that are important, and certainly not important to the future of X-Men comic books. And it almost feels like Jordan White and the Legion of Doofus, led by Gerry Duggan and Kieran Gillen, were like, well, if we can't have X-Men, we can't have the Krakoan era, like nobody can, we'll salt this and make it so terrible that no one will ever read X-Men again because, oh man, I'm really taken aback by just how bad this is and just how fundamentally the creators of X-Men don't realize the way that they portrayed their heroes of the last 4 years or whatever. But then again, Gerry Duggan is the guy that wrote X-Men Green, and he thought that was heroic, the mutant going out there and murdering people over plastic bags or whatever. So I guess maybe it's on brand for Gerry Duggan and the X-Men to write something like this and not realize by the end that you've proven Orca's completely right and that none of this has anything to do with Charles' dream and it's not really X-Men anymore. A lot of people have asked me, why, over all these years have the Marvel Comics universe not accepted the mutants? They're basically like Avengers. They got powers and stuff like that. It's not like it's a concept people can't get their heads around. This is the reason why. Because once Charles achieves his dream and everyone accepts mutants for who they are and everyone loves each other, the X-Men comic book dies. There's no story left to tell. That's the end of the book. So that's why it never really happens. But normally you can find cool, inventive ways to keep the story ongoing. Unfortunately, we got to the Krakoan era and they turned the X-Men into the bad guys and decided that was the way to keep the story going, even though the X-Men are supposed to be the superheroic team in the book. And it just does not work. It certainly does not work in Fall of the House of X. Obviously, I was considering reviewing this with Doc. I thought it was a 50-50 that would be good. But once I actually read it ahead of time and I realized how bad it was, I knew I needed to get it out early. And also, Doc's been through enough, A lot of X-Men fans that have been around for 30, 40 years have been through enough at this point. And I just didn't have it in me to make him read something like this and just to see something that you love just kind of die at the hands of Jordan White and Gerry Duggan. We'll see what Kieran does with House of the Powers of 10 or whatever that stupid book is. It's only there to remind you that you liked House of X Powers of 10. They might get a number on this one. People might read the first issue, but I don't see a lot of people at least coming back because it was that bad. It's not a good comic book. Lucas Wernick is a pretty okay artist. I wouldn't put him on an event book. I don't think he's that good. And there's just, if you like unintentional laughs, maybe this is a book that might be in your wheelhouse. But if you like good storytelling, if you like the X-Men, if you like, superheroes, I just don't think this is going to be the book for very many people. And a very fitting end to the beginning of the end of the Krakoan era, but certainly doesn't do the beginning any justice and certainly isn't going to salvage what has been an absolute dumpster fire for 2.5, 3 years at this point. Obviously, I'll be covering this and much, much more here on the channel. I'll be talking about this particular comic book with Jim from Weird Science on the Patreon exclusive podcast, A Hot or Not Show, where we'll talk about this and all the other #1 issues. And I think Marvel had 5 of them this week. DC had 3. And there's a lot of important comic books that came out. On Thursday, we'll talk about them all. If they're good, bad, indifferent, kind of in the middle. And we'll run it all down, let you guys know what the best stuff out there is, the worst stuff out there. If you haven't checked the Patreon out, we've actually got 7-8 hours of brand new content, mostly in podcast form. That's a whole lot of fun. Definitely, if you haven't checked that one out, definitely consider it. There's a link to the Patreon in the video description. And I think there's a lot of stuff there that you're going to like.